Is
Hey.
there any difference between animal-based protein and plant-based protein?
No, because whether it's animal or plant-based is not the important thing. The important thing is the amino acid profile, which are the building blocks. So different foods have different amino acid profiles. So it's not the source that matters. What matters is that you get a variety of proteins, because you have 20 different amino acids and 9 are essential, which means those 9 are amino acids that your body cannot produce itself. So you need to get those from food. So instead of plant or animal-based, think variety of proteins to complete your amino acid profile.
So there are so many articles outside which talks about you need to eat at regular intervals and not starve longer. So how does that 12 to 16 hours of starving, fasting,
It's okay.
fasting, sorry, fasting gets ties up into that?
So, okay, frequent meals versus fasting. Okay, so the theory behind the frequent meals is your metabolism increases to process the food you just ate. But your metabolism never increases to eliminate the net increase of calories that you get in the form of proteins, carbs, and fats. So in other words, the metabolic increase from digesting food is not enough to override what you just ate. With that said, the reason why intermittent fasting is not very popular is because it's not marketable. I mean, you can't really sell nothing. So frequent meals are typically recommended because, hey, you could sell protein drinks and you can sell like meal replacements to eat at those frequent intervals. But your body's going to reach fasting physiology during that period without food. And the small metabolic increase you get from digesting food is never enough to override the actual calories contained in that meal.
So 12 to 16 hours is doable. I've been doing it lately and with cheats. So, because if I eat my dinner the evening before, 7 a.m. the next day, 12 hours, the clock starts ticking. Mm-hmm. I'm having black coffee. I go for a run at lunch, I faint on the sidewalk because I got nothing. I'm exaggerating, but I feel really faint and I don't feel like I'm getting the intense workout that I would like to have if I have some food in my system. Mm-hmm. So I take a bite of a fruit or I take some cream with my coffee. Is that, how does that count in the big picture?
Basically, those are the two things I would recommend, because the fruits are going to be a lighter glucose load, and they're digested very immediately. So if you feel that way, fruits would be the ideal choice for a pre-workout meal. And then as far as the cream in the coffee, again, that's going to be a better choice than sugar, because if you remember, the glucose is more likely to increase, well, glucose increases insulin the most, and it's more likely to convert into triglycerides. And then because fats are digested slower, the cream in your coffee would sustain you longer than having sugar.
When you say intermittent fasting, are you just talking about daily and it has to be done daily, or is it as effective if you did it 3 times a week or at a different frequency?
So you could start with once a week, and then you can do it as often as every day. What I like about doing it as a daily is because you build that habit. So once a week minimum, and then work your way up to incorporating it as a daily routine. And if you do need to have breakfast first thing in the morning, I would still recommend primarily proteins and fats. So think like veggie and cheese omelet versus a stack of pancakes, because that will give you a lower glucose load.
So I've been on a fat loss journey for the past couple months, which sounds a lot better than diet. So I feel like I haven't made the progress that I should have. You know, we have all these fancy gadgets like this Fitbit, right, that tell us what our energy expenditure estimate is for a day, and we're supposed to calculate like a calorie deficit, right, to run each day, and then the idea is that I'll lose weight doing that. My program consists of a pretty strong deficit at this point, as well as lots of at least half an hour of cardio and then weightlifting on top of that. But I haven't seen the weight loss that I think I should. What do you think's going on with that?
Yeah, again, Roy, I would definitely recommend setting up the metabolic assessment with me just to compare the numbers, and then we can see where you're at. Really, if you're not making the progress, but you're possibly maintaining your weight, it's probably just going to be a lower calorie intake is all you need. And the intermittent fasting helps because you don't feel like each meal is very tiny. You feel like you're able to actually still eat satisfying meals and then go for longer periods where you're burning through stored energy and body fat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I'd heard, and maybe this is a false myth, but I had heard things like coffee actually increase your insulin or can spike it. So when you said, you can do intermittent fasting, but then black coffee's okay, green tea's okay, those kind of things, it just struck as counterintuitive to what I've heard. So was what I heard wrong? Can you just clarify what's going on?
Now, it is true that, with a high amount of coffee, yes, it could spike your insulin. Just on a practical level, we're just balancing this with what helps you sustain the fast. So if you have like 8 to 12 ounces of coffee, I don't think that's enough to spike your insulin. Now, having an excessive amount, yes, it can spike insulin, but again, because you're not having glucose or any macronutrients with it, there's nothing to be stored. So in the worst case scenario, having too high of an amount can possibly prevent you from losing fat at the fastest rate, but it's not going to completely eliminate it.
I have two questions. One is kind of a follow-up on time of day, or if you're doing intermittent fasting, what's, I guess for the purposes of fat loss, what's the most effective time to do your high-intensity workout? Is it at the end, right before you start eating, or in the middle of eating? I have a second question, which is about dairy and insulin, and what's your opinion there? I've read it can really spike insulin, but that it may not have the same negative fat storage way as like pure sugar would, for example.
Right, okay, so first question about timing of exercise in relation to intermittent fasting. So during the latter stages of your fast, so during that 12 to 16 hour window, you're gonna get the highest catecholamine release. So if that's in the morning, then that would be the ideal time to exercise. Now, what matters more is that you actually exercise. So if you have to do it in the evening, then do it in the evening. But during the latter stages of the fast is when you're going to get the highest catecholamine release, so you're going to have more mental alertness, and you're going to be mobilizing stored energy. And your stomach is going to be completely empty, which redistributes blood flow to your working muscles. So if that happens the following morning and you can time your workout then, great. Now, as far as dairy goes, some dairy products are better than others. I personally would avoid drinking milk because milk has sugar called lactose. Some better dairy foods would be like a Greek yogurt that's high in fat and low in sugar. Cheese would be another ideal source because certain nutrients release insulin in higher and lower amounts. Sugars or carbohydrates release insulin the most, and then proteins less, and then actually fats the least. So a high-fat diet is going to be better for you than a low-fat diet. And you won't really hear that anywhere else. The low-fat eating method is actually very outdated science, but stick to high-fat, low-sugar dairy.
Well, calorie in versus calorie out, how much of a difference will that make if you're maintaining your macros and micros perfectly? Like, do you really care about carbs versus like the 40-30-30 ratio?
Right, yeah.
If you break that, does it really hinder your progress?
What I would shoot for is high fat in terms of percentage of total calories, moderate protein, low carb. So the actual percentages would break down to 55% fat, right? 20% protein, and 5% carbohydrates. Because you're gonna be getting most of your carbohydrates from fiber, which are not digested into glucose. Beer, the rest is beer, yeah. I'm sorry, I meant to say 75% fat, so even higher. So 75% fat, 20% protein, 5% carbs. And the reason why you don't want too much protein is because those excess amino acids are converted into glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis. And that extra glucose can follow the same pathways that stimulate triglyceride formation. If you're a high-performance athlete, you would want a higher carbohydrate intake. So you want to tailor it to your physical activity. But for the average person doing just normal activity or just like a 45 to 60-minute workout, a ketogenic diet, where your brain relies on ketones for fuel, and you keep your carbohydrates low, is a practical strategy, and it'll also keep your appetite low.
Hey, Jason, when you said workout has to be intense enough to be effective, how do you define that? I heard the most efficient fat loss heart rate is like 180 minus your age. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So, again, every exercise is going to be better than none. And then even low-intensity exercise burns fat at a slower rate, but it's going to be burning more than resting. I personally don't pay attention to heart rate because it's very indirect. Because other things can raise your heart rate that don't involve actually working your muscles. So the feeling you want to go for is actually in the muscles that are working, because those are the things that demand blood flow and will raise your heart rate. So it's kind of one of those feelings like let's say you try to sprint as fast as possible. You get the metabolic buildup in your muscles, and then you get kind of that slight burn. So that's actually the feeling you're going for, either tension in the muscles or that slight burning sensation.
So on intermittent fasting, our bodies, I think, tend to get pretty used to patterns. And I'm curious if there's some logic to breaking up the pattern of intermittent fasting to where you don't do it, at the same time. You vary that interval to different periods of the 24-hour cycle in an attempt to kind of keep your body always guessing as to when it's going to get its next, meal and so forth.
Right.
As a way to sort of fire up the furnace and increase metabolism. Is there any logic to that?
No, I mean, in terms of physiology, there's no need to really shock your body or keep it guessing. What can happen is if intermittent fasting works for you to reach a lower body fat percentage, that's going to affect your maintenance level of calories. So you're burning less fuel typically at a lower body fat percentage and lower body weight. Just to illustrate, sumo wrestlers have a high body mass. They have both high muscle and high body fat. And they also have a very high metabolism. But that's one of the things where I don't really care if my metabolism is that high, if my body mass and body fat percentage are going to be that high. So no need to really keep your body guessing or shock your body. But what's really happening is at a lower body fat percentage, you're going to have a different maintenance level of a calorie intake.
Is there a relationship between number of hours you sleep versus weight loss?
Your fat cells, so you release two hormones that regulate your appetite. Your fat cells release a hormone called leptin, which tells you that you have enough energy. And your digestive system releases a hormone called ghrelin, which stimulates your hunger. And sleep debt has been shown to increase your ghrelin levels. So sleep deprivation can actually make you hungrier. And I've experienced this myself. I know when I'm short on sleep, I tend to crave carbohydrates when the thing I really need is rest. And during the early stages of sleep is when your body releases the most growth hormone in waves.
What would you say is a reliable way to track fat loss or body composition change?
This is the least scientific way of assessing your body composition, but in my experience, I've done probably 1,000 body composition assessments in my career, but visually assessing your body composition, and I can give you some more detail on this later, is the most accurate method that I've found. And just like some examples would be Like for men at 15% body fat, a true 15%, you start to like kind of get the ab definition under the right light, and then you kind of see like the outline of the muscles.
If I pull down
Pull.
a little.
Yeah. Not the right light, no. It's the lighting. So visually assessing your body composition is one good way and how your clothes fit. Now, women have a higher level of essential body fat because fat is needed for the reproductive hormones. So men, essential body fat is about 5%, and then women's would be closer to 10%. Essential body fat. You'll rarely ever find people that low body fat, like a true 5 to 10%, because they would look like a walking cadaver.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Bish.
What about the protein powders or the protein bars? Are they good or bad or okay?
Neither good or bad. What I like about like protein snacks is that they give you something, like let's say you're very busy at work and you have like a high protein, high fiber, low sugar bar that you can have instead of like a bag of M&Ms, which are going to be higher in sugar and fat. So they're good in that case. I personally don't think you need to supplement in between meals with protein because that's also going to spike your insulin instead of putting you in the fasting physiology. And you don't need that much protein to begin with. Muscle magazines tell you that you need 1 gram of protein per pound of body mass. So like a 200-pound individual would need 200 grams of protein. That's more toward the higher end, and that works if you're a fitness model on steroids because steroids increase protein synthesis. So the actual calculation would be more like 1 gram per kilogram of body mass. So like a kilogram is your body weight divided by 2.2. And then that's how you can estimate the amount of protein you need to either maintain or gain lean body mass.
I have a question about beer and wine and drinks. I mean, what are your thoughts about drinking wine, beer? I mean, is it any place in your diet for this kind of fun drinks?
I'm not one to tell you how to live. First of all, you don't need wine for the health protective benefits. If you like to justify it that way because you want to drink a glass of wine, that's fine. But the alcohol content is going to temporarily stop fat loss, which is okay. I mean, you don't have to be burning fat around the clock. Sometimes you can take a break from your diet. What I would say is like having wine or having a drink, if that helps lower your stress levels, that's going to indirectly lead to a better body composition. So it's okay to take breaks from your diet. Don't think all or nothing.
My question is, for fat loss, is there a healthy rate and an unhealthy rate, and how would you define those?
Sure, good. Okay, so healthy rate versus an unhealthy rate of fat loss. The higher your body mass that you're starting at, the faster you can lose fat. So someone who is, let's say, over 200 pounds, they can safely lose about 3 pounds per week. And then eventually that's going to narrow down or level off to about 2 pounds per week. And then I would say a safe level of fat loss is about 1 pound per week. And the thing you need to realize is that when you're losing body fat, you're not losing 100% from your fat stores. The fat stores we're all familiar with are like the ones that are directly under the skin that we can see. But like there's also fat marbling within your muscles. It's called intramuscular triglyceride. It's like when you look at a steak and you see the marbling, which are the white parts. So there's that. You're going to lose glycogen, which carries water weight. So in my experience, for men particularly, for every 2 pounds of body weight or body fat you want to lose, you're actually going to lose 3 pounds on the scale, which is why a lot of people underestimate how much weight they need to lose to get to a lower body fat percentage. But 1 to 2 pounds per week is a safe rate.
You said leafy greens. Mm-hmm. Does that exclude iceberg lettuce?
Not necessarily. I mean, well, iceberg lettuce, by the paler green, it has a lower amount of the alkaline minerals, lower nutrition overall. You're still going to benefit from the fiber content and the bulk in it, so not doing any harm. It's not a worthless food, but I would definitely mix it with other deeper greens.
If I'm losing more than just fat when I'm cutting fat, does that mean I'm losing my sick gains?
Sick gains.
So like muscle mass, essentially.
No. So your lean body mass is everything that's not body fat. Now, going back to the sumo wrestler example, the reason why someone who has a very high body mass, let's say they're 300 pounds, some of that extra muscle mass exists just to carry around that extra body fat. So the thing I would look for instead is how's your strength in the gym? So like how are your lifting pounds? And then visually, are you getting more cuts or definition versus kind of maintaining the same level of definition but just getting smaller? So the only time you really need to worry about losing muscle mass as you're decreasing body fat is when your body fat gets so low that you're approaching like that single digit range where it's more likely that you're going to burn through muscle mass. But I would prioritize losing fat because you are going to decrease in size only because you're losing fat bulk and then all the other things that come with it. So keep lifting and just pay attention to your poundage. Yeah.
So this is coming back to the vegetables. I'm assuming vegetables in general are better overall, but sometimes I don't feel like a salad is like red cabbage, cauliflower, and carrots just as effective as leafy greens. They're not necessarily green.
Yes, so I didn't mean to single out, well, greens are going to be the highest fiber, highest nutrition, lowest carb, but any of your non-starchy vegetables or like lower starch, so like carrots and cabbage, tomatoes, which is more of a fruit vegetable, those are going to be lower in starch than like a potato. So leafy greens are one option, but all the other lower starch vegetables, so the way you can tell is when they're very crunchy. And then also cooked vegetables, so like your cruciferous vegetables, broccoli. Something I'm living off of now is cauliflower rice. I used to, I see your head nodding. So cauliflower rice, I always used to think like cauliflower is a more boring version of broccoli. But for dishes, that I found that there were dishes that called for rice. And when I wanted to lower my carbs, cauliflower rice is just finely chopped cauliflower that cooks very fast. And then you can just have a mountain of it for a single digit number of carbs and then kind of make those dishes that typically would have rice. So low starch vegetables. Fair game. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, well, I will stay around to chat. Thank you so much for coming. It's all been great. Thank you so much.